Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Star Wars Lads as we bring you our first episode of our Andor Season 2 predictions and speculation. This will be a little bit different because we have 3 episodes to talk about. We're going to talk about where we think this specific arc will go. Make sure you like the video if you haven't subscribed to the channel for more content just like this. We do predictions every week for every single arc. So if you want to know our predictions for the next 2 arcs after this, stay tuned for our predictions on the channel. Comment below what you think is going to happen in this arc and whether you think this one will be one of the big ones or you think this will be kind of another setup arc here as we continue into season 2 of Andor. All right, let's get into the plot. So, of course, our first arc ended with some major things happening at the end for our characters. First, we had Mon Mothma and her seemingly controversial on the internet drunken dance at her daughter's wedding. Her daughter has been married off, though, and her friend Tay, ex-love interest, he's trying to blackmail her, and Luthen seemingly takes care of him. So we've got that character possibly dying off screen. Got Mon Mothma's daughter married, and then one of the big ones was of our Ferrix survivors. Brasso is the one to bite the dust as Cassian does not arrive in time to save him as the Ferrix survivors try to escape the Imperial invasion. So now that that's all done, Arc 1, like I said earlier, kind of a setup arc, getting us back into the vibe of Andor and us back reacquainted with the characters. But it does provide one big plot point that is carried throughout the first arc and seemingly will be carried throughout the rest of the show, and that's the Gorman Massacre. They do set that up in the first episode. You have director Krennic making a dream team of Imperials to try to figure out a way to farm Calcite off of Gorman. And so they're trying to set this up. Gorman Massacre doesn't happen till 2 BBY. Each one of these arcs is supposed to jump 1 year. So hypothetically, 3 BBY will be our next arc. But Sonic, when you have all these details and stuff we've seen from the trailers, where do you think we're going to go for the second arc of Andor Season 2?
For the second arc, I do believe we're gonna go to the heart of the galaxy. We're gonna go to Coruscant. I can sort of see the suave Cassian kind of work in the second to last arc, but again, because we know the exact date of the Gorman massacre, it kind of reduces possibilities, and I wouldn't want that to be a plot focus in my mind in that final arc, unless that is just a simple disguise and that's how he's getting Mon out of there. But I would assume that suaveness is not going to really be what Cassian is going to be known for in there if he's going to be extracting her from that situation. He'll be a little bit more closer to that cold-blooded rebel who doesn't really have these connections, doesn't really have a lot of these feelings that have driven him in the same way at the start of Rogue One, right? They definitely come back by the end because of Jyn Erso, because of the whole Rogue One squad. But yeah, at this point in the story, especially after losing Brasso, I think right now it's him just continuing to full commit to the rebellion under Luthen and how that's changing. And I think this is going to be an arc of a lot of change, and it makes sense for it to be a lot of change in this arc because I now believe that Mon Mothma is going to be politically unleashed. I think there's no more playing games anymore. She was literally tied to a string because of Tay, because of her daughter, because of everything that she's trying to do for the rebellion. And yet she can't. She's kind of dependent on Luthen, who she doesn't trust to really. She's kind of going with what he says and does, but that's because he's the one who has the power, the one who's actually rebelling right now. For all intents and purposes, she's just a financer. So now that that's kind of squared away, now that she's made that big sacrifice of just letting her daughter be married off in much older traditional values of the Chandrillans, which her and Vel are not very comfortable with themselves, right? It's like, okay, let's see what's going to happen now. I'm going to bring it to you, Palpatine. I'm going to bring it to you, Senate. I know we're going to see some great Senate shots, but I actually also expect her to start really doing the politicking that she first kind of became famous for, which was like the delegation of 2000 with her and Bail and Padme. Obviously, Padme can't show up in this story because she's dead. But I think this is also where we get to see Bail Organa finally in the show. There's been a lot of rumors that Bail Organa has been recast because of Jimmy Smits' scheduling conflicts. So we may be seeing Benjamin Bratt play him. I'm hoping it looks great, but I think I'm definitely assuming that this is going to be her kind of really pushing more of like into a leadership role, being like, okay, I'm not just orbiting around what Luthen's doing. We need to start organizing this. We have all these different cells, and we're hearing and we're seeing from like Cassian's perspective that they're a mess, they're unorganized, and that's allowing people like the Partisans under Saw Gerrera to justify a lot more of their behavior and the extremes that they're doing to rebel, to be more terrorists even than even rebellion leaderships and figures. And hope, right? Like that is what eventually Mon Mothma is trying to build towards by the original trilogy with the Yavin Cell, with their characters of Luke, Han, and Leia, right? So I think we're gonna see a lot of just the discussions of what that really means between them. Obviously, Bale is also hampered by the fact that he's kind of hiding Leia, and there's only so much he can do as he continues to put more and more of the Emperor's eye on Alderaan in a way that maybe Mon Mothma doesn't necessarily do with Chandrila. So I think that's going to be a pretty good starting spot for the episodes for her because that's just someone that we're supposed to be familiar with. I don't know how well Benjamin Bratt would look like as Bale, but start off with like a familiar territory, maybe a session that just ended in the Senate. They're discussing like what she's actually trying to do and what she had to kind of like make PC for that audience so that way that the Emperor and Masameda, nobody knows exactly what she's trying to say or what she's trying to instigate here. I wouldn't be surprised if she also throws in a little bit more about like what the different departments of the Empire under Krennic are doing on Gorman, like what are some of the changes and stuff that are happening. So definitely can see a lot of that. And I think we're gonna see Vel start working a little bit more closely with Mon Mothma. Obviously, there's that familial relationship, and she's jumped into that storyline since season one. But now, especially having seen Cinta and how she's being used by Luthen, I wouldn't be surprised if this is like where Mon Mothma not only uses the justification of family, but also experience with Luthen's activities to kind of start dictating her terms, her sort of conflicts that she wants to escalate outside of the Senate floor. And I think this obviously create tension with Luthen, but I think this is something that Mon Mothma, because now she's independent from the financial issues, independent from all these different fears. Now she's only got her focus on two things, Gorman and the rebellion. I wouldn't be surprised if she starts mounting pressure on Luthen, especially as we've seen him not crack per se, but he keeps on slipping more and more, just a little bit more. He seems like he's always able to gather himself back and make the tough, extreme choice at times, like we've seen with like what he implies to have done to Tay. But he's not the same Luthen that we see at the beginning of season one, right? He's not the same, not even the same guy who makes that fantastic monologue in season one. He's bought into Cassian, and as a result, everything's kind of cascading and building up in a way that he didn't really expect or feel like he's going to be pushed around by. So I do definitely see Mon Mothma finally kind of taking the upper hand in that relationship, no more like being dictated by his terms. I also would assume that their relationship will not be just in his antique shop. I expect to see that set that's behind the Senate building to be a place where maybe that's when they have a lot of these discussions. And that's probably where Cassian finally gets introduced as sort of this like kind of bridge player where pseudo Anakin kind of spying on each side. He's there to kind of observe Mon Mothma, help her as needed. And then likewise, she feeds him like a little bit more what she knows about Luthen, what's changing about him, and kind of has him be like, look, do you really want to be like this? Or do you want to be like this sort of rebellion figure, this sort of character that we can put people behind? You can't just be spewing propaganda and then shooting people left and right in cold blood, right? What do you really mean to the rebellion? What are you trying to say about yourself? So I can see a lot of push and pull and just so many different political arenas. And I think that's going to dominate the majority of the story. That allows Dedra and Syril to come in. And I do think we'll see a little bit more of like their house life together and the pressures of Gorman and that sort of mission as it escalates for Dedra and what her role is there, what she's going to be doing different compared to the other departments, and how she's going to like escalate by putting in Imperial backed insurgents and all that. So I think we're going to see some of the more extreme next steps being done by Dedra and how that's going to affect like the choices that she brings to the table, quite literally with Cyril, who after a wonderful time with his mother, probably feels a little bit more indebted to his presumably his lover because they are seemingly living together. But I do think, like you were saying, Liam, on our streams, he's going to be the human voice of it. He genuinely means to do well. He genuinely believes in the Empire, but Dedra is a little bit more of psychotically believing in that, while he's more logically, more humanly trying to think about that. So I think that's going to cause a lot of tensions. I don't know if this is a situation where Dedra will pull him a little bit more into the activities, and especially because you might need a hand outside of ISBX surveillance. But this could also be a case where Cyril feels like he needs to take up more of like the police duty that he used to have back on Morlana 1 and kind of maybe start looking and seeing what Dedra really is up to. What is she trying to hide, or what's she letting slip anytime they have their interaction? So I think we get those four as our primaries. We get some partisan stuff kind of happening, just a bunch of scenes to show what they're doing, what Saw Gerrera is up to, kind of put him as like a tertiary head up there with Bail and up there with Mon Mothma because of especially Mask of Fear and the development that he's gotten out of that, and just with canon and everything leading into Rogue One. I don't know if we'll get anything between him and Luthen, but I wouldn't be surprised if we maybe see him start to interact with Mon Mothma and maybe Bail a little bit more. directly than we've ever seen. So maybe some conversation, some hollow stuff there. Cassian and his friends, right? It's going to be a big separation. I think I'm frankly, I think Wilmon's going to die or just leave. I don't think this is a happy enough show that he can peacefully be with that girl back at that planet, Miriyala, right? So I do think he'll probably die, but I could also just see him be like, yeah, he's just left the story entirely. Like, there's no real value for him now. He's just found somewhere peaceful, or just sticking his head out when he can. But this is just what he needs to do. So I can see this being an arc where Bix kind of gets recruited by Luthen. If Cassian's going to be the one kind of being played around and dressed up and having to put on the suave and charm and talk his way every single angle, he's still going to need an effective weapon. And I think Bix, especially now that she's been pulled out of the misery and everything that of her torture in season 1 and the attempted rape at the start of season 2, I think now it's going to be like, yeah, okay, I'm ready. Like, no matter what, even if I have to sacrifice my happiness, if it just means that I can make things better, just like Cassian and everyone has been doing, I'll do it. So I could see her be on Coruscant, be recruited for something like that. Past that, I don't know. I really think that's just the majority of the storylines there.
I think what this arc is going to focus on is defining the rebellion and defining what is the rebellion, who are the rebellion, and what makes a rebellion. And I think that's where we are really going with this arc. It's another setup arc in a lot of ways, but I think it's about to set up, from what we've heard, an epic 2-arc finale. Everybody's been saying the last 6 episodes are the perfect, amazing episodes of Andor season 2. So I'm expecting this arc to be kind of increasing the tension towards that. One of my favorite parts of Andor is the fact that every single episode is just drenched with tension, because even though we know, where it's going in terms of the ultimate rebellion and the destruction of the Death Star and the Death Star plans and all that type of stuff, this show, these characters, a lot of the characters involved don't make it there. And so we're going to see what happens to a lot of these people and how do some of these relationships fracture. And just also having Star Wars Rebels as window dressing around here really gives us a lot of clues on who's going to be doing what and where a lot of things could happen. So one of the big things I think with this as well is we know Gorman Massacre. It's one of the inciting incidents that causes Mon Mothma to make her speech, her formal declaration of the Rebel Alliance, her formal declaration of war basically against the Galactic Empire. And so I expect her in this episode to have one last push to do things in the system. I expect her to be running aggressive senatorial campaigns, trying to get as many people on board with her as possible, really seeing the futility of her actions as everybody just turns away. Everybody's afraid. Nobody wants to be involved with this. I'd love to see that Senate scene. I'd love to see if we finally get to see who's in that big Senate pod in the middle. Is it Masamita? Is it actually Palpatine? Does Mon Mothma do something that shakes the Empire enough to where Palpatine has to appear? I'd love to finally see who's in that pod. But I think we're going to get a lot of Senate. And if we get a lot of Senate, if this is Coruscant focused, then I think that mission with Cassian as the spy that looks and appears to be Coruscant-esque could be where he goes in this episode. I think he'll be a little bit more boots on the ground in the last 2 arcs, and so I kind of expect this arc to be almost similar to the first one for Cassian, where he's there, but a lot of things are happening around him, not necessarily to him. I think the big thing that could happen here is a shift in ideology, and one of the big things we see at the end of the first arc is Luthen kind of losing control. He's slowly losing his war, not necessarily because he's not doing the right thing of fighting the Empire, but he's just so all consumed, so tunnel visioned really around his own plot, the way he wants to control everything. He doesn't like loose variables, but yet things don't go according to plan. And so it's him having to get his feet dirty, but also the fact that he's going to have to control these other pieces. Before, it's been him and his expendable operatives. And even though Cassian has been kind of an expendable operative to him, there are ways in this where I think Cassian starts to feel like, I'm more than an expendable person to you. Mon Mothma treats me maybe like a person, and I'm going to join the Rebel Alliance eventually because we know he's there in Rogue One. So, and Luthen's not. And that doesn't mean necessarily Luthen dies. He could be off doing his own thing somewhere. But I think Luthen is going to slowly lose his grip on the people that he trusts and ultimately be confronted with the decision on who do I have strings left to pull and how am I going to use those strings to orchestrate the rebellion the way I want to control it. So I do kind of expect and hope that along with that story, you see a little bit of the Partisans. I hope the Partisans are more than just one arc, because if you see the partisan side, the more terrorist, militaristic, brutal side of the rebellion, juxtaposed with the actual rebel alliance that's going to form next episode or next arc, then you have the two different sides. We also have the rebel group of Lothal, and we know that Bail Organa is actively involved in the first two seasons of Star Wars Rebels, even if he just appears kind of at the end of season one. He's involved in those seasons, and he's watching the hologram that Mothma gives, and he's with the rebels at that point while he's watching that hologram. So like, he is more involved in the rebels than Mothma is at this point. And I expect if we do see him, that those kind of hints at like a larger group, him talking about what he's done, maybe you actually see the alliance form between the two of them now instead of them being opposing forces. One thing that I never really understood about their relationship, at least from canon, before reading Reign of the Empire Mask of Fear, is the fact that they don't necessarily agree on the same ways of fighting against Palpatine and fighting against the system. They have very different priorities, even if they're after the same thing ultimately. So I want to see that clash, and I want to see little bit of that brought over. I think Reign of the Empire Mask of Fear is probably informed by some of the things that Andor decided to do, and maybe we'll see some confrontation between the two of them head to head. So I'd like to see that. I do think Dedra's going to be working actively towards the Gorman massacre. She did say in the first episode that she thinks the way to basically commit genocide on Gorman is to start a rebellion, basically coax the people into rebellion so the Empire has a purpose, a reason to put them down. And so I think we'll see her and the Empire already on Gorman in this episode, going about it in a political way, going about it in a rule following way. And then as we see her start to pull the strings, things start to shift and sentiment starts to change on Gorman. The Gore people start to get more and more frustrated with what's going on. And maybe that's where we see some of the Partisans come in. But I think Luthen's going to reach out to the Partisans, because if he loses a little bit of grip on Mothma, if he loses his grip on Cinta or Vel, some of the other people that have been in his circle, he could reach out to the Partisans for their support to do something maybe a little bit more drastic in this arc. So I would love to see how that's all connected. But I think I expect Dedra and Syril's arc to not be that big. I think it's still set up for ultimately what's to come. I see Syril as maybe a sacrificial figure later on, like somebody who could send Dedra fully to the dark side or help her see maybe some of the folly of the Empire. They're going to go one way or the other. But I feel like Syril doesn't have too much more to offer the show outside of his support for Dedra. I think he's a good boots on the ground perspective. He's a good perspective of somebody who just truly loves the system and thinks that they can make it work. Almost the opposite of Mon Mothma, where she's eventually going to rebel. He's going to try everything he can to make the military and kind of police side of the Empire work. But I think ultimately Dedra's plan is going to cause him to die, and we know that she has no family ever. We find out she was an orphan raised in the Imperial kindergartens, and so she is devoted completely body and soul to the Empire. Syril is kind of the first person she'll have ever actually had feelings for outside of the Empire. And so I expect her to see his death as like a motivating reason for her to just go insane. And I don't think that'll happen in this arc. I think it would be Gorman Massacre-esque and something involved with what she does. But here's where I think we start to get a little bit more of the seeds of rebellion and start to shift people towards ultimately the more pure side of the Rebel Alliance that we see, even if Cassian always kind of rides that line. But Mothma's got to get there, and I think we see her start to get there in this arc. But what do you guys think? Let us know in the comments below. Do you think we're on track? Do you have other ideas? Do you think there are major plot points that we're missing? Do you think certain characters are going to show up in this arc? Let us know all that in the comments below. Make sure you like the video again, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more of our Andor coverage. We go live immediately after the episodes end. So if you want to join us live and ask your questions and comment and theory with us on stream, feel free to do so. We'd love to have you there for that stream. You can watch that on replay as soon as it's over as well, if it's too late at night for all of you. Thank you so much for watching, everybody, and we will see you all next time.